She said, "You're lucky I even chose you. Most guys I date drive BMWs." I said, "True. You deserve one of them." She didn't deserve the look on her face when I pulled up in a brand new M8, with someone else in the passenger seat. I, 32M, never thought a single sentence could change the entire trajectory of my life. But here we are. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of unremarkable day that should have just faded into the background of our relationship like all the others. We were sitting in my Honda Accord, stuck in traffic after grabbing dinner at some overpriced Italian place she'd insisted on trying. The air conditioning was struggling against the summer heat, and I was already thinking about the credit card bill that would arrive next week. That's when she said it. She told me I was lucky she even chose me, that most guys she dated drove BMWs. The words came out casually, like she was commenting on the weather. She was scrolling through her phone, probably looking at her friends' vacation photos on social media, and didn't even look up when she spoke. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling something shift inside my chest. For a moment, I considered arguing, defending myself, listing all the things I did for her. Instead, I heard myself agree. I told her she was right, that she deserved one of them. She finally looked up from her phone, confusion flickering across her face. She asked what I meant, her tone suddenly defensive. I kept my eyes on the road and simply said that if material things were what mattered to her, then she should be with someone who could provide them. The conversation died there, suffocating under the weight of unsaid things, and we drove the rest of the way home in silence. We'd been together for 3 years. 3 years of me bending over backward, picking up extra shifts at the engineering firm where I worked, taking her to expensive restaurants, buying her gifts I couldn't afford. 3 years of hearing about her exes and their fancy cars, their family money, their summer homes. I'd always brushed it off as meaningless talk, convinced that what we had was deeper than that. Apparently, I'd been wrong. That night, lying in bed while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and did something I should have done years ago. I took inventory of my life. I was 32, working 60-hour weeks at a job that paid well but drained me completely. I had a degree in mechanical engineering from a good state school, a solid work ethic, and a portfolio of side projects I'd been tinkering with for years but never pursued seriously. I'd let everything take a back seat to this relationship, convincing myself that sacrifice was love. The next morning, I woke up with clarity I hadn't felt in years. She was already up, getting ready for her job at the marketing agency where she worked part-time. She asked if I was still upset about what she'd said, her tone suggesting I was being overly sensitive. I told her I wasn't upset at all, that I'd actually been thinking about her words, and I agreed with her assessment. She stopped applying her mascara and turned to look at me, clearly thrown off by my calm demeanor. I explained that I thought we wanted different things, that our values didn't align, and that it would be better if we went our separate ways. The look on her face was almost comical, a mixture of shock and disbelief. She immediately backtracked, saying she hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that she loved me for who I was, not what I drove. But I could see through it now, could see the panic in her eyes that wasn't about losing me, but about losing the security and attention I provided. I remained firm. I told her I'd already thought it through and that I needed to focus on myself for a while. She tried everything, tears, anger, promises to change, but I'd made up my mind. By the end of the week, she'd moved out of my apartment, taking her endless collection of throw pillows and scented candles with her. My place felt empty but cleaner, like I'd finally opened the windows after years of stale air. The first month after the breakup was strange. I had all this time suddenly, hours that used to be consumed by her demands and drama. I started going to the gym at 5 in the morning, something I'd abandoned when we got serious. I dusted off the business plan I'd been working on for years, a specialized automotive consulting service focused on performance modifications and engineering solutions. It was niche, but I knew the market, and I had connections from my work and my own obsession with cars. I reached out to an old college friend who'd gone into business development. Over beers, I laid out my plan, and he actually got excited about it. He'd been looking for something to invest in, and he saw potential in what I was proposing. Within 2 months, we'd filed the LLC paperwork and started building a client base. I was still working my day job, but I poured every spare moment into this venture. 3 months after the breakup, I got a message from her on social media. She'd heard through mutual friends that I'd started a business and wanted to know how I was doing. Her message was carefully crafted to sound casual, dropping hints about how she'd been thinking about us lately, how she'd made a mistake. I read it twice, felt nothing, and left it on read. 6 months in, the business was actually gaining traction. We'd landed a few high-profile clients, guys with serious money who wanted custom work on their luxury and performance vehicles. Word of mouth in that community is everything, and we were building a solid reputation. I was working insane hours, but it felt different than before. This exhaustion came with purpose, with the satisfaction of building something that was mine. That's when I made the decision that would eventually lead to the moment I'd been unconsciously working toward. One of our clients was upgrading his car collection and offered to sell me his BMW M8 competition at a price I could actually justify. It was a stunning machine, midnight blue with carbon fiber accents, the kind of car that turns heads at every stoplight. With the business doing well and some careful financial planning, I could make it work. But more than that, I wanted it. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because I'd finally reached a point where I could have something I'd always wanted. I bought the car on a Friday afternoon. Sitting in the driver's seat for the first time, feeling the engine rumble to life, I experienced this profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't about her, not really. This was about me finally prioritizing myself, finally reaping the rewards of my own hard work instead of pouring everything into a bottomless pit of someone else's expectations. A month after I got the M8, I met her. The new woman, I mean. She came into the picture unexpectedly, which is how the best things usually happen. She was a client initially, bringing in her brother's Porsche for a consultation on some modification work. She was sharp, funny, asked intelligent questions about the technical aspects of what we were proposing. She worked in finance, had her own career, her own money, her own life that she'd built through the same kind of grinding work I understood. We grabbed coffee after that first consultation, then dinner. Then suddenly I was looking forward to her text the way I used to look forward to weekends. She was different in every way that mattered. She insisted on splitting bills, was genuinely interested in my work, had ambitions of her own that didn't involve using someone else as a stepping stone. When she first saw my car, she complimented it, but then immediately started asking about the business and how things were growing. The car was impressive to her, sure, but what really captured her attention was the work and dedication it represented. 8 months after the breakup, things were better than I could have imagined. The business was thriving. I dropped 15 pounds of relationship weight and put on muscle, and I was seeing someone who actually enhanced my life instead of draining it. My ex had tried reaching out a few more times, each message a little more desperate, a little less subtle. I'd blocked her after the third attempt. Then came the Saturday that tied everything together. The new woman and I had plans to check out a cars and coffee event downtown, one of those weekend morning gatherings where enthusiasts show off their vehicles and talk shop. I'd been looking forward to it all week. We were running a few minutes late, and I was driving through the neighborhood where I used to live with my ex, the same area where that Italian restaurant was located. That's when I saw her. She was standing outside a cafe with 2 of her friends, the same friends who used to make snide comments about my practical car choices. They were dressed up in their weekend brunch outfits, probably about to go take photos for social media. And she saw me at the exact same moment. I watched it all happen in slow motion. First, her eyes widened as she recognized my face. Then her gaze dropped to the car, and her expression shifted to confusion. Then she noticed the woman in my passenger seat, laughing at something I'd just said, looking effortlessly beautiful in the morning sunlight. The confusion transformed into something else entirely. A mixture of shock, regret, and what I can only describe as devastation. I'd imagined this moment, if I'm being honest. During those first few weeks after the breakup, I'd fantasized about exactly this scenario. But now that it was actually happening, I felt nothing like I'd expected. There was no triumphant surge of vindication, no desire to rub it in her face. Instead, I felt this profound sense of peace, this confirmation that I'd made the right choice in walking away. I didn't slow down or make a show of it. I simply drove past, keeping my attention on the road and the woman beside me, who hadn't even noticed the brief sideways glance I'd given my ex. She was still talking about her week, about some difficult client she'd dealt with, and I was genuinely interested in what she was saying. The moment passed in seconds, but I knew it would stay with my ex much longer. Update 1. I didn't think I'd be writing an update to this, but things escalated in a way I wasn't prepared for. About a week after that brief sighting downtown, I started getting messages. Not from my ex directly, but from people in our old social circle. Mutual friends, mostly her friends, suddenly reaching out after months of silence. They wanted to grab lunch, catch up, see how I was doing. The transparency was almost insulting. I ignored most of them, but one person I actually respected from that group was persistent. She was someone who'd always been kind to me, who'd actually questioned some of my ex's behavior even while they were friends. She finally called me directly and was upfront about it. She told me my ex had been a mess since seeing me that Saturday, that she'd apparently broken down at brunch and spent the entire day crying. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk to her, to give her some closure. I asked what kind of closure she was looking for, considering she'd had 8 months to process the breakup. My friend got quiet, then admitted that my ex had apparently been telling everyone that I'd left her because I wanted to focus on work, that it was a mutual decision, that she'd been the one to suggest we take a break. The narrative she'd constructed made her the mature one, the one who understood I needed space to grow. Seeing me with someone else, especially in the kind of car she'd literally measured my worth against, had shattered that story. I told my friend I appreciated her honesty, but that I had no interest in providing closure for someone who couldn't even be honest about what had actually happened. That should have been the end of it, but my ex apparently wasn't done. She somehow got my new number. I changed it a few months back and started calling. I let them all go to voicemail at first, but she was relentless. Finally, I listened to one of her messages. Her voice was different, smaller than I remembered. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that seeing me had made her realize what she'd lost. She acknowledged that she'd been materialistic and shallow, that she'd taken me for granted. She wanted a chance to talk, to explain, to maybe explore whether there was any possibility of us trying again. She mentioned that she'd started therapy, that she was working on herself, that she understood now what really mattered. I sat with that message for a full day, not because I was considering her offer, but because I was processing how I felt about it. There was a time when hearing those words from her would have meant everything to me. I'd spent years wanting her to value me for who I was, to see beyond the surface level markers of success. But now, listening to her voice crack with emotion, I felt nothing but a mild sadness for her. I called her back, which surprised her. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the hope in her voice when she said my name. I kept it brief. I told her I appreciated her reaching out and that I was glad she was working on herself, but that there was no possibility of us rekindling anything. I explained that I'd moved on completely, that I was happy, and that she should focus on her own growth without me as a goal or endpoint. She tried to interrupt, to argue, to tell me that I didn't understand how much she'd changed. But I continued, telling her that the person I was with now showed me what a healthy relationship actually looked like, and that I wouldn't trade that for anything. I wished her well, genuinely, and then I ended the call before she could respond. I blocked her number immediately after. The woman I'd been seeing knew some of what was happening. I'd told her about my ex reaching out, about the history there. She listened without judgment, never once acting threatened or insecure. When I told her I'd blocked my ex's number, she simply squeezed my hand and suggested we take the M8 out for a drive along the coast. That was it. No drama, no demands for reassurance, just an understanding that I'd handled it, and we could move forward. Update 2. 2 months later, things had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The business was exceeding all our initial projections, and we were actually hiring our first full-time employee. The woman I'd been seeing had essentially become my partner in every sense, and we were talking about moving in together. Life felt stable, purposeful, and genuinely happy. Then I got an unexpected call from my ex's mother. She'd always liked me during our relationship, had actually treated me better than her daughter did in many ways. She apologized for calling, said she'd gotten my work number from the business website. She wanted me to know that my ex had been struggling, that the breakup had hit her harder than anyone realized, and that seeing me doing so well had triggered something of a crisis. I felt a pang of guilt at that, which I recognized as old conditioning. I had to remind myself that I wasn't responsible for her emotional well-being, especially not after how she'd treated me. But her mother wasn't asking me to get back together with her daughter. She was actually calling to thank me. She told me that her daughter's breakdown had actually been a catalyst for real change. She'd not only started therapy, but had really committed to it, working through some deep-seated issues around self-worth and materialism that apparently went back to her childhood. Her mother admitted that she'd raised her daughter with certain values that prioritized appearance and status over substance, and seeing the consequences of that had been a wake-up call for the whole family. She said her daughter had finally stopped reaching out to me, that she understood it was over, and that she was actually dating someone new. Someone, her mother emphasized, who wasn't wealthy or flashy, but who treated her well. She wanted me to know that the pain I'd inadvertently caused by moving on had actually been the push her daughter needed to genuinely change. She thanked me for being strong enough to walk away when I did. The conversation left me thoughtful. I'd never wanted to hurt anyone, but I learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst tendencies. By staying in that relationship, I would have been silently agreeing that her treatment of me was acceptable. Walking away had not only saved me, but apparently given her the opportunity to become someone better. I shared the conversation with my partner that evening. We were sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset, and she listened to the whole story with that focused attention she always gave me. When I finished, she pointed out something I hadn't fully appreciated. She said that the revenge I'd inadvertently gotten wasn't about the car or the new relationship or even my success. The real revenge was that I'd become genuinely happy, and that happiness had been so evident it couldn't be faked or hidden. That authenticity had shown my ex exactly what she'd lost, not in material terms, but in human terms. 3 months after that conversation with my ex's mother, my business partner and I were closing our biggest deal yet. A luxury car dealership wanted to contract us for all their custom modification work, a partnership that would essentially secure our financial future for years to come. We celebrated that night with champagne and sushi, and I found myself reflecting on how drastically my life had changed in just over a year. I never saw my ex again after that morning outside the cafe. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different part of the city, that she was doing better, that she'd apparently learned to value different things. I was genuinely happy for her. In the abstract way you're happy for anyone who's figured out how to be a better person. The woman who'd been in my passenger seat that morning was now much more than a passenger in my life. We'd moved in together, we're talking about long-term plans, we're building something that felt solid and real. She'd met my family, I'd met hers, and there was this easy integration of lives that I'd never experienced before. When we had disagreements, we talked through them like adults. When one of us succeeded, the other celebrated without jealousy. When one of us struggled, the other provided support without keeping score. The M8 was still in my garage, still a beautiful machine that I enjoyed driving. But it had become just a car, a nice car, but ultimately just metal and engineering. It wasn't a symbol anymore, wasn't a statement, wasn't proof of anything except that I'd worked hard and treated myself to something I wanted. The real victory had nothing to do with the car at all. Looking back, I realized that my ex had actually done me a favor with that comment in the Honda Accord. She'd accidentally held up a mirror that showed me how much of myself I'd sacrificed, how small I'd made myself trying to be enough for someone who'd never see me clearly. That single sentence had been the catalyst I needed to reclaim my life, to remember my worth, to stop settling for someone who saw me as lucky to have her instead of recognizing how lucky she'd been to have me. The revenge, if it could even be called that, wasn't planned or malicious. It was simply the natural consequence of someone choosing themselves, doing the work, and building a life that reflected their actual values. The fact that she had to witness it was almost incidental, a brief moment of cosmic justice that the universe happened to arrange. I never set out to prove anything to her. I set out to prove something to myself, that I was capable of more than I'd been allowing, that I deserved better than I'd been accepting, that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's limited perception of me. And in proving that to myself, I'd inadvertently shown her exactly what she'd undervalued and lost. The best revenge really is living well, but not because it hurts the person who wronged you. It's because living well means you've moved past needing revenge at all, that you've healed enough to build something new and better, that you've transformed pain into growth and resentment into wisdom. The look on her face that morning was just a footnote in a much larger story about choosing yourself, about refusing to be diminished, about recognizing that sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. And every time I start that engine, every time I look at my partner and see genuine appreciation and respect reflected back at me, every time I walk into the business I built and see my name on the wall, I'm reminded that I made the right choice. Not because of what I gained materially, but because of who I became in the process of claiming my own life back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.